Have you ever truly looked at a map of the world? Not just glanced at it, but stared into the familiar shapes of the continents, the vast empty blue of the oceans. It feels solid, doesn't it? It feels certain. A story of our world written in coastlines and borders. A story we are told began with brave explorers sailing into the unknown, slowly, painfully charting the darkness and bringing back the light of knowledge. We are taught that our history is a steady upward climb from ignorance to enlightenment, that the ancients, for all their wisdom in philosophy and monuments in stone, were trapped in a small provincial world, unaware of the true shape of their own planet. But what if that story, the one taught in every classroom, printed in every textbook, is a lie? Not a small lie, but a lie so vast it has defined our entire understanding of who we are. What if there are maps that exist not as theories, but as physical, tangible artifacts that tell a completely different story? Maps that were drawn long before the celebrated age of exploration, yet show things they couldn't possibly have known. Lands hidden beneath miles of ice. Continents that shouldn't have been discovered for centuries. What if these are not just maps of geography, but maps of time, pointing to a chapter of our own history that has been deliberately torn out, erased, and forgotten? This is not a story about cartography. This is a story about a memory of a drowned world and a lost civilization. And tonight, we begin the search for it, not in myths or legends, but in the forbidden lines of ancient maps. Our journey begins not in the distant past, but in the year 1929, in the heart of Istanbul, within the opulent walls of the Topkapi Palace, the former seat of Ottoman power. Tucked away, gathering dust on a forgotten shelf, a German theologian named Gustav Deissmann was cataloging the palace's vast library. He was not looking for controversy, he was simply doing his job. But what he found that day would send a shockwave through the worlds of history and science, a shockwave that is still felt today. It was a fragment of a map, beautifully drawn on gazelle skin. It was signed and dated. The cartographer was a celebrated Ottoman admiral and mapmaker named Piri Reis. The year was 1513. At first glance, it was a masterpiece of Renaissance cartography. It showed the coasts of Europe, North Africa, and the coast of Brazil with remarkable detail. But as scholars began to study it, a chilling realization began to set in. The map showed far too much, far too accurately. In 1513, Columbus had only landed in the New World a mere 21 years prior. The coast of South America was barely known, a place of myth and rumor, not a precisely charted coastline. Yet Piri Reis had drawn the rivers, the bays, and the intricate geography of the continent with a precision that should have been impossible. How could he have known? The answer, it turned out, was written on the map itself. In his own hand, Piri Reis had inscribed a series of notes. He was not a first-hand explorer, he admitted. He was a compiler, a researcher. He wrote that to create this map, he had used over 20 different source maps. Some were contemporary, from Spanish and Portuguese sailors, even one supposedly from Christopher Columbus himself. But others, he claimed, were far, far older. He spoke of maps from the time of Alexander the Great, over 1,800 years before his own time. He spoke of ancient charts, what he called the old maps, that had been preserved from a time before. This was strange enough. But as cartographers and naval intelligence officers from around the world began to examine the map in the 20th century, they found something that defied all logical explanation. They looked at the bottom edge of the parchment, at the landmass extending eastward from the tip of South America. The geography was unfamiliar, a strange curving coastline, and then they realized what they were looking at. The coast it depicted was not the coast of 16th century South America, it was the coast of Antarctica. How can that be? Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, more than 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. How could a 16th century Turkish admiral possibly know of a continent at the bottom of the world? But the mystery only deepens, becoming a cold, creeping fear. The coastline shown on the Piri Reis map is not the Antarctica we know today, a continent buried under a thick, permanent sheet of ice. The map shows the coast of Queen Maud Land, but it shows it as it would look without the ice. It shows river estuaries, mountain ranges, and a shoreline that no human has seen for at least 6,000 years, and perhaps much, much longer. In the 1960s, a professor of history and science named Charles Hapgood, along with his students in Keene State College, took on this mystery. He sent the map to the United States Air Force. They asked them to compare the coastline on this ancient map with the most advanced modern data they had, the seismic echo soundings of the Antarctic bedrock, data gathered by a Swedish-British expedition in 1949 that showed the shape of the land beneath the ice. The response he received was staggering. The chief of the 8th Reconnaissance Technical Squadron, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Omeyer, wrote back. His words are now part of history. He said, "The claim that the lower part of the map portrays the Princess Martha coast of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, is reasonable. We find that this is the most logical and, in all probability, the correct interpretation of the map. The geographical detail shown agrees very remarkably with the results of the seismic profile made by the Swedish-British Antarctic expedition of 1949. Think about what that means. A 16th century map, drawn from sources that were themselves ancient, showed the true ice-free coast of a continent that modern science only managed to see using radar technology in the middle of the 20th century. The ice cap that covers Antarctica is, in some places, over a mile thick. It has been there, according to geologists, for millions of years. For this map to have been drawn from direct observation, someone would have had to survey Antarctica before the ice covered it. This opens a door to a terrifying possibility that a highly advanced civilization, one with the knowledge of spherical trigonometry, the ability to accurately determine longitude, and the capacity for global seafaring, existed in a distant, forgotten past. A civilization that mapped the world and then vanished. Who were they? Where did they go? And most importantly, where are the source maps that Piri Reis spoke of? Those ancient charts that held this impossible knowledge? Could they have been destroyed? Or are they hidden, locked away by someone who doesn't want us to know the true story of our past? The Piri Reis map is not an answer, it is a question. It is the first clue that our version of history is fragile, that it is built on a foundation of missing pieces, and that we may be suffering from a collective amnesia, a forgetting of who we once were. If the Piri Reis map was a single, isolated anomaly, it could perhaps be dismissed, a coincidence, a lucky guess, a strange flight of artistic fancy. Mainstream history has certainly tried. They argue that the supposed Antarctic coast is merely a distorted drawing of the South American coastline, bent to fit the shape of the parchment. They say it's imagination, not evidence. But what happens when the anomaly is not isolated? What happens when a pattern begins to emerge? Just 2 decades after Piri Reis created his unsettling masterpiece, another map was produced in Europe that only deepens the mystery and pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible. In 1531, the respected French mathematician and cartographer Orontes Finus published a world map. It was a beautiful, heart-shaped projection, a common style for the era. But at the bottom of this map, surrounding the South Pole, is a vast continent, a landmass labeled Terra Australis, the southern land. This in itself was not unusual. For centuries, geographers, since the time of the ancient Greeks, had theorized that a large southern continent must exist to balance the land masses of the northern hemisphere. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. It was a placeholder, a guess. But the map of Arantes Finus was not a guess. Like the Piri Reis map, it depicts Antarctica in stunning detail. But it goes even further. While Piri Reis showed only a fragment of the coast, Finus's map shows the entire continent, and what it reveals is nothing short of terrifying. It doesn't just show the general outline of an ice-free Antarctica. It shows rivers. It shows mountain ranges and coastlines and fjords in places that are now buried under a solid mile-thick sheet of ice. Professor Hapgood and his team studied this map as well, and what they found was chilling. The features depicted by Finus in 1531, the mountains, the valleys, the waterways, closely match the subglacial topography of Antarctica that has only been revealed in our modern era through ice-penetrating radar. Finus drew riverbeds where we now know ancient frozen rivers lie. He drew a coastline that has not been seen by human eyes in millennia. How could he possibly know this? Like Piri Reis, Phineas was a compiler. He was a scholar, working from a library, not a sea captain exploring the unknown. He too must have had access to source maps, ancient documents that contained this impossible information. What's more, the map shows a clear waterway separating Antarctica into two main land masses, one larger and one smaller. For years, this was dismissed as a fantasy. But in 1958, a seismic survey conducted during the International Geophysical Year confirmed this very feature. Beneath the ice, Antarctica is not one solid continent, but an archipelago of large islands and landmasses, connected by the ice sheet. A feature shown with haunting accuracy on a map from 1531. Now, we are no longer looking at one strange map. We are looking at two, and they are not alone. The famous cartographer Gerardus Mercator, whose map projections are still used today, included an ice-free Antarctica on his maps from the 1560s. So did Philippe Boucher, a French geographer, in a map from 1737 that also depicted the continent separated into two land masses by a sea, long before modern science confirmed it. A pattern is forming, a dark and undeniable pattern. Multiple cartographers working across different centuries in different countries seem to have had access to the same impossible knowledge that points to a single ancient source, a source created by a civilization that could not only sail the entire globe, but possessed a level of scientific knowledge equal to, or perhaps even greater than, our own in the 20th century. This pushes the question beyond a simple historical puzzle. It forces us to confront a possibility that history, science, and religion have all tried to suppress. The possibility that our civilization is not the first, that we are not at the peak of human achievement, but are perhaps just children playing among the ruins of a far greater and far older civilization that we have forgotten. Who were these people, these ancient sea kings, as Professor Hapgood called them? A people who understood longitude and spherical geometry at a time when we are told our ancestors were living in huts. A people who charted the world from pole to pole and then disappeared so completely from history that their only echo remains in the faded ink of these forbidden maps. And if they existed, what happened to them? Was it a cataclysm, a pole shift, as Hapgood himself theorized? A great flood that drowned their world and their memory along with it? And what of their knowledge, their libraries, their records, their maps? Where did it all go? This is where the fear truly begins, because knowledge like that doesn't simply vanish. It's too powerful, too dangerous. Knowledge like that is either destroyed on purpose or it is hidden. It is locked away. It is guarded by those who understand what it truly means. Those who know that if this truth were ever revealed, it would not just rewrite our history books, it would shatter the very foundations of our world. So we must ask, who are the gatekeepers? Who stands guard over this forgotten chapter of human history? The answer to that question is a journey into the shadows, into the places where history is not written, but controlled. If these ancient, impossibly advanced source maps existed, where could they have been kept? Where in the ancient world was there a place that held the sum total of human knowledge, a library so vast it was said to contain scrolls from every corner of the known world? The answer, of course, is the Great Library of Alexandria. For centuries, Alexandria was the intellectual heart of the planet. Founded by the Ptolemies in Egypt, it wasn't just a library, it was a research institution, a think tank, a place where the greatest minds of antiquity gathered. Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth with astounding accuracy. Euclid, the father of geometry. Archimedes, the brilliant inventor and mathematician. They all walked its halls. The library had an aggressive acquisition policy. Every ship that docked in Alexandria's port was searched. Every book, every scroll, every map found on board was confiscated. A copy was made by the library scribes, and the copy was returned to the owner. The original was kept for the library's collection. They were building a complete archive of humanity. Imagine what was in there. Not just the literature and philosophy we know about, but the science, the engineering, the geography, scrolls describing technologies we have yet to rediscover, histories of peoples and places that have been erased from our memory, and almost certainly, maps. Maps of the entire world compiled from the knowledge of ancient seafaring cultures who had been everywhere, seen everything, and charted it all. The source maps that Piri and Orontius Phineus must have used. And then it was gone. The story we are told is one of tragedy and accident, a fire or a series of fires during times of war and political upheaval, Julius Caesar's conflict in 48 BC, the decree of Theophilus in 391 AD, ordering the destruction of pagan temples, the final blow during the Muslim conquest in 642 AD. The narrative is one of careless destruction, of knowledge lost to the flames of religious intolerance and the chaos of war. A terrible accident. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if the destruction of the Library of Alexandria was not a simple act of burning, but a meticulous and targeted act of erasure, a purging? What if certain powers understood that the knowledge contained within those scrolls was too dangerous, that it told a story of the past that contradicted the New World Order they were trying to build? A history where advanced civilizations existed long before them. A history where science and technology were not new discoveries, but were ancient and forgotten. A history that did not place them at the center of the universe. To control the future, you must first control the past. And there is no better way to control the past than to burn the evidence, to destroy the records, to erase the memory. Think about it. Who benefited from the world forgetting its own history? Who rose to power in the centuries following the library's decline? The Roman Empire, and later, the Christian Church. An institution that built its entire worldview on the idea that it was the sole bearer of truth and light in a world of darkness and ignorance. A worldview that would be directly threatened by the existence of an ancient, highly advanced pre-Christian civilization. Could it be that agents of these rising powers didn't just burn the library, but that they sifted through it first? That they took what was valuable, what was powerful, and hid it away for their own use, while destroying everything that challenged their narrative? Is it possible that the most important maps, the ones showing the true shape of the world, were not turned to ash, but were spirited away in secret, taken to a new vault, a new library, where they would be kept hidden from the eyes of the world? This brings us to another place, a place that exists today. A place of immense power and secrecy, with an archive so vast, no one truly knows what it contains. An archive that has 85 kilometers of shelving,
an archive that has been sealed to the public for most of its history. The Vatican Secret Archives.
What if the legacy of Alexandria didn't die? What if it was simply transferred? What if, locked away in the deepest, most secure vaults beneath Rome, lie the original maps of the ancient sea kings? What if the Church has known the true history of our world all along? They knew about the Americas, they knew about Antarctica, they knew about the civilization that came before, and they chose to hide it. Why? To protect their own power, to maintain a version of history that places them at the center of the human story, to keep humanity in a state of spiritual childhood, dependent on them for knowledge and salvation. The idea is terrifying, that the greatest crime in human history was not the burning of a library, but the theft of our own memory. We have been living in a curated reality, a historical narrative crafted by gatekeepers who decided what we were allowed to know. The Piri Reis map, the Orontius Phineas map, these are not just cartographic oddities. They are leaks, cracks in the wall of a prison we didn't even know we were in. They are echoes of a drowned world calling to us from a past we were never supposed to remember. They are proof that our history is a mystery, and that the key to that mystery might be hidden, locked away, waiting in the darkness beneath the heart of an empire built on secrets. And these maps, as incredible as they are only the beginning. They are the first glimpse through a keyhole into a room that has been locked for millennia. In the next chapter, our journey will take us deeper into the shadows. We will look at other forbidden maps, maps that show not just forgotten continents, but lost ones. Maps that chart the locations of lands that now exist only in our most persistent legends. Maps that point a finger directly at the myth of Atlantis. And we will be forced to ask the most dangerous question of all. Are we the first advanced civilization to call this planet home? Or are we merely the latest in a long line, a civilization with amnesia, living on a planet that is littered with the ghosts and ruins of those who came before us? The past is not dead. It's not even past. It's just waiting to be remembered. If you believe these questions deserve to be asked, if you feel that the search for our true history is a journey worth taking, then subscribe to this channel. Do not let these questions fade back into the silence. Help us keep them alive, because the story of our world may be far stranger, far older, and far more magnificent than we have ever been told. But if such a civilization existed, one with the power to chart the entire globe from pole to pole, then we must ask the next terrifying question. Where did they live? A global seafaring culture must have a home port, a capital, a heartland. Yet our history books are silent. Our archaeology is silent. There are no recognized ruins of a worldwide, technologically advanced ancient people. Is it possible that their homeland didn't just fall into ruin, but that it vanished completely? That it was swallowed by the sea, leaving behind nothing but a persistent, nagging memory in the oldest legends of humankind? For thousands of years, one name has been whispered to answer this very question. A name that is, for most, a synonym for myth and fantasy. But what if it isn't a myth? What if it's a memory? The name is Atlantis. The story we are allowed to know comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who around 360 BC wrote of it in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. He described Atlantis as a mighty naval power, an island empire located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, out in the Atlantic Ocean. He painted a picture of a civilization of breathtaking sophistication. They had brilliant engineers who built a capital city of concentric rings of land and water, connected by massive canals and bridges. They had temples clad in silver and gold, advanced metallurgy, and a powerful military that held dominion over parts of Europe and Africa.
Plato tells us this empire was founded by Poseidon, the god of the sea, and for generations its people were noble and virtuous. But as their power grew, so did their hubris, their greed, and their moral decay. And so the gods turned against them. Plato's account ends with a chilling finality. He writes, "But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis, in like manner, was swallowed up by the sea and disappeared. In a single day and night it was gone, an entire continent, an entire civilization, erased from the face of the earth." For centuries, the mainstream world of academia has treated Plato's story as just that, a story, a fable, a philosophical allegory he invented to make a point about the dangers of imperial pride and the ideal state. They tell us there is no evidence, no ruins, no proof. Atlantis, they say, exists only in the pages of a book. It is a work of fiction. But what if Plato wasn't an author of fiction? What if he, like Piri Reis, was a compiler of a much older memory? In his own writings, he insists the story is true, that it was passed down to him from his family, from the great Athenian lawmaker Solon, who in turn heard it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. These priests, the guardians of Egypt's immense historical records, told Solon that their temple walls held the story of this lost empire, an event that had occurred 9,000 years before their own time. If that timeline is correct, that would place the destruction of Atlantis at around 9600 BC, over 11,000 years ago. This aligns perfectly with the end of the last ice age, a period of immense geological upheaval, melting glaciers, and catastrophic sea level rise. A time when entire coastlines and landmasses around the world did, in fact, disappear beneath the waves. Is it a coincidence? Or is Plato's story the last surviving historical account of a real cataclysm that destroyed the heartland of the same civilization that mapped the ice-free coasts of Antarctica and Greenland? The academics tell us to dismiss it, but maps have a way of remembering what historians choose to forget. And there is a map created by a man with access to the deepest secrets of the old world that charts this supposedly fictional place with unsettling confidence. In the 17th century, at a time when the world was being aggressively remapped by the great powers of Europe, one man was engaged in a different kind of cartography. He was not charting new lands, but lost ones. His name was Athanasius Kircher. He was not a sea captain or an explorer. He was a German Jesuit scholar, one of the most brilliant and respected minds of his time. He was a polymath, a scientist, a geologist, a student of ancient languages, and a man with unprecedented access to one of the most secret and extensive libraries in the world, the Library of the Vatican. The Jesuits, as we have explored, were more than just priests. They were the intelligence network of the Catholic Church, the keepers of knowledge, the collectors of ancient texts and maps from every corner of the globe. And Kircher was one of their most trusted scholars. In 1665, he published a monumental work called Mundus Subterraneus, or The Subterranean World, a book of geology and geography. And buried within its pages is a map that should not exist. It is a map of Atlantis. Kircher's map shows a large island, a veritable continent, sitting squarely in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, precisely where Plato had described it. It lies between the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of the Americas. The map is oriented with the south at the top, a common convention in some ancient mapping traditions, but what it depicts is revolutionary. It doesn't just show an island, it shows its topography, mountains, rivers, and a central volcano, just as Plato's account detailed. He labels it Insula Atlantis, the island of Atlantis. Where did a 17th century Jesuit scholar get this information? The official story is that he was simply illustrating Plato's myth, But Kircher was a man of science, a man who prided himself on empirical study. He claimed in his work that he was drawing upon ancient sources, not just Plato, but Egyptian and Chaldean records that he had studied in Rome. He believed he was reconstructing a piece of real, lost geography. Could Kircher, through his privileged access to the Vatican's secret archives, have seen one of the original source maps, a map saved from the destruction of Alexandria, a map made by the Atlanteans themselves, passed down in secret for millennia? The thought is enough to make the blood run cold. Because if the map is real, it means the Vatican has known about this lost chapter of human history for centuries and has kept it hidden, allowing the world to believe it was only a myth. And then modern science began to catch up with the forbidden map. In the 20th century, as oceanographers began to chart the floor of the Atlantic Ocean,
They discovered a massive underwater mountain range running down its center, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. They also discovered the Azores Plateau, a large region of elevated seabed near the ridge. Geologically, this is a volcanic hotspot, a place of immense tectonic activity. Some geologists have theorized that large parts of this plateau could have been above sea level in the not-too-distant geological past, before sinking during a period of intense crustal movement. Is this the sunken remnant of Kircher's Atlantis? Is his map not just a fantasy, but a genuine memory of a landmass that once existed and is now gone? Look at the map. He places Atlantis precisely over this region of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Coincidence? Or was he working from an ancient source that had charted this lost land before it was swallowed by the sea? We're faced with a terrifying convergence of evidence. Plato's detailed historical account, which he swore was true. The geological reality of a submerged landmass in the Atlantic. And a map created by a Jesuit with access to the Vatican's hidden knowledge that depicts this very landmass. The official story is crumbling. The line between myth and history is blurring. And the Kircher map stands as a silent accuser, a piece of forbidden knowledge that suggests the greatest empire in human history wasn't conquered. It was drowned. And its memory was deliberately buried under the label of myth by those who wanted to write a new history for the world, a history in which they were the only masters. The pattern is the most terrifying part. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. We have maps from the Renaissance, a period of supposed rediscovery that contain impossible knowledge of the Earth's polar regions. Antarctica without its ice. And now, as we turn our gaze from the South Pole to the North, the pattern repeats itself with chilling precision. Another map, another cartographer, another landmass shown free of an ice cap that has covered it for thousands of years. This time, the location is Greenland. The story begins with a Venetian family of navigators, the Zeno brothers, Niccolo and Antonio. In 1558, a descendant of this family, Niccolo Zeno the Younger, published a map and a series of letters he claimed to have found in an old storage room of his family's estate. These documents, he said, were over 150 years old, chronicling a voyage made by his ancestors in the 1390s, more than a century before Columbus sailed to the Americas. According to these accounts, the Zeno brothers sailed far into the North Atlantic, discovering islands and lands unknown to Europe. The map published by their descendant became known as the Zeno map. For centuries, it was both famous and infamous. It depicts a number of large islands in the North Atlantic that do not appear on any modern chart. The largest of these is called Frislanda.
Historians have long debated whether these were real discoveries, perhaps of parts of Iceland or the Faroe Islands, that were inaccurately charted, or if the entire map was a clever forgery created by the younger Zeno to bring fame to his family name. But as with the Piri Reis and Oronteus Phineas maps, the true mystery of the Zeno map lies not in what is there, but in what shouldn't be. The map shows a remarkably accurate depiction of the coastline of Norway, the Shetland Islands, and parts of Scotland. But it is its portrayal of Greenland that is utterly impossible. The Zeno map shows Greenland, but it shows it without its massive central ice cap. The modern Greenland ice sheet covers 80% of the island and is, in places, nearly 2 miles thick. It has been there for over 100,000 years. Yet the Zeno map, supposedly based on a 14th century voyage, depicts Greenland's eastern coastline with mountains, valleys, and deep fjords. It shows details of a landscape that has been completely hidden from view for millennia. It is a map of a temperate, habitable Greenland. How is this possible? There is no way 14th century sailors, with their rudimentary navigation and sailing technology, could have known the subglacial topography of Greenland. There is no way they could have charted a coastline that was buried under ice. The only logical conclusion, the same chilling conclusion we reached with the maps of Antarctica, is that the Zeno brothers, or whoever created their source material, were not charting a contemporary land. They were copying a much, much older map. A map made during a distant epoch when the world's climate was warmer, when the poles were not locked in ice, and when Greenland was in fact green. Once again, Professor Charles Hapgood turned his attention to this anomaly. He compared the Zeno map to a modern map of Greenland's subglacial terrain created by a French polar expedition in 1947. The correlation was undeniable. The rivers and mountains shown on the 16th century map matched the features discovered by modern science lying beneath the ice. We now have a confirmed pattern: Antarctica and Greenland, the South Pole and the North Pole, both depicted on Renaissance-era maps as they appeared thousands of years before our recorded history in an ice-free state. This cannot be a coincidence. This points to a single, unified source of knowledge, a global cartographic project undertaken by a civilization that existed during this temperate period and that had the means to survey the entire planet. This lost civilization, these ancient sea kings, didn't just map the tropics or the Mediterranean. They mapped the entire world, including the poles, at a time when they were habitable. Then something happened, a global cataclysm, a sudden shift in climate that plunged these lands into a deep freeze, burying them and the memory of the map makers under miles of ice. The Zeno map, like the Piri Reis map, is a relic of that lost world, a message in a bottle that has washed ashore in our time, telling us that our history is incomplete. It tells us that we are not the first to achieve a global perspective. It suggests that the age of discovery was not an age of discovery at all, but an age of rediscovery, a slow and painful process of finding again what a previous forgotten humanity already knew. And as we stare at the impossible coastlines of Greenland on this old, faded map, we are forced to ask, what else did they know? What other lands did they chart? Lands that are not just covered in ice, but that may have vanished from the earth altogether. The maps of the poles are a signpost, pointing us further into the mystery, toward the legends of lost homelands in the north. As we journey deeper into this labyrinth of forbidden maps, we find that the mysterious cartography of the North Pole is not limited to the Zeno map's depiction of an ice-free Greenland. There are other maps and other legends that point to a lost polar homeland, a sacred center from which a forgotten civilization once originated. The ancient Greeks spoke of it. They called it Hyperborea.
According to their myths, Hyperborea was a perfect land, located far to the north, beyond the Riphean Mountains, beyond the reach of the cold north wind, Boreas. It was a place of perpetual sunshine and eternal spring. Its inhabitants, the Hyperboreans, were a blessed race, living for 1,000 years without disease, without labor, and without war. They were said to be giants, favored by the god Apollo, who would spend the winter months among them. It was a paradise, a golden age civilization at the top of the world. For mainstream history, Hyperborea is, like Atlantis, just a myth, a Greek fantasy about a perfect, distant land. But what if it was a memory of a time when the Arctic was not a frozen wasteland, but a temperate, habitable region? This is where the work of another great Renaissance cartographer, Gerardus Mercator, becomes deeply unsettling. Mercator is a giant in the history of map-making. His Mercator projection is the foundation of modern navigation. He was a man of science, of mathematics, of precision. Yet, on his famous 1569 world map, and even more explicitly on his map of the Arctic published posthumously by his son in 1595, he depicts something that seems to come straight from the world of myth. At the very North Pole, Mercator draws a large island continent, which he calls the Rupes Nigra et Altissima, the black and very high rock. This continent is divided into 4 separate landmasses by 4 powerful rivers, all flowing inward towards a central point, a whirlpool that he claims pulls the oceans of the world into the Earth's interior. This polar continent is no longer on any modern map. Where did Mercator, a scientific cartographer, get this image? Was he simply illustrating a popular legend? His own notes give us a clue. He wrote that his depiction of the Arctic was based on older sources, specifically the now lost account of a 14th century Franciscan friar from Oxford, who had traveled to the region. This friar, in turn, claimed to have been working from even more ancient sources. Once again, we find a modern mapmaker admitting he is copying information from a distant, forgotten past. Look at the details. A continent at the pole, 4 great rivers, a sacred mountain or rock at the center. This geography is not just in Mercator's map. It is a recurring theme in the cosmology of numerous ancient cultures. The ancient Persians spoke of a northern homeland, Arianem Vea, with a central mountain. The Hindus have their sacred Mount Meru at the center of the world. The Chinese have their Mount Kunlun. It is a persistent, shared memory of a sacred polar homeland. Could Mercator's map be a genuine, albeit distorted representation of the Arctic as it was before the last ice age, before a pole shift or climate cataclysm changed the geography of the planet? It fits the pattern. The Piri Reis map and the Orontius Phineus map show an ice-free Antarctica at the South Pole. The Zeno map shows an ice-free Greenland, and the Mercator map shows a lost continent at the North Pole. All of these maps are like pieces of a single shattered puzzle. They are all showing us a picture of a different Earth, a prehistoric world inhabited by a global civilization that understood its geography from pole to pole. The legends of Atlantis, Hyperborea, Thule, and other lost homelands are not separate myths. They are fragmented memories of this one great, forgotten episode in human history. The implications are almost too vast to comprehend. It means that the rise of civilization after the Ice Age, in places like Sumer and Egypt, was not a beginning. It was a recovery.
It means that the survivors of this global cataclysm, scattered and traumatized, were the ones who carried the seeds of knowledge to the rest of the world, sparking the civilizations we know to history. They were the gods and culture bearers who appear in the myths of almost every ancient people, bringing with them the knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, and architecture. And it means that the official narrative of our past, a slow, steady climb from primitive cave dwellers to us, is a comforting fiction. The truth may be far more dramatic and far more terrifying. That we are a species with amnesia, that a highly advanced human civilization has existed on this planet before, and it was wiped out. These forbidden maps are the last surviving records of their world, a world that was drowned, a world that was frozen, a world that was erased. And they ask of us a question we have been too afraid to answer. If it happened to them, could it happen to us? We have followed the trail of ink on faded parchment from the ice-free shores of Antarctica to the sunken plains of Atlantis, from the green valleys of a forgotten Greenland to the mythical continent at the North Pole. Each map is a voice from the past, each telling a piece of the same impossible story. The story of a world that existed before our own, a world that was mapped by a sophisticated global civilization, and a world that was destroyed by a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. Now we must step back and look at the whole picture. The Piri Reis map, the Aranteus Phineas map, the Kircher map, the Zeno map, the Mercator map. They are not individual puzzles. They are a single coherent body of evidence. They all point to a consistent truth, that our planet's geography and climate were radically different in the prehistoric past, and that someone was there to witness and record it. So what could have happened? What could an event be so powerful as to shift the crust of the planet, sink continents, and trigger an ice age that would bury entire land masses under miles of frozen water? This is where we leave the realm of history and enter the realm of geology and ancient myth, and we find that they tell the same story. Professor Charles Hapgood, the man who brought these maps to the world's attention, proposed a scientific theory to explain them: Earth crust displacement. He argued that the Earth's entire outer crust could, at times, shift in one piece over the softer layers beneath it, like the skin of an orange slipping over the fruit. Such a shift, he proposed, would move entire continents into different climatic zones in a very short period of time. A continent at the equator could be moved to the pole. A continent at the pole could be moved to the equator. The result would be catastrophic. Worldwide earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis of biblical proportions, and rapid climate change. Antarctica would move to the South Pole and freeze over. Land in the Atlantic could sink beneath the waves. The world described by the ancient maps would vanish, and our modern world would be born. Is there any evidence for such a thing? The myths of humanity are filled with it. Nearly every culture on Earth has a memory of a great flood. From the story of Noah in the Bible, to the epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, to the story of Manu in India, to the legends of the Hopi, the Maya, and the Inca in the Americas. Over 200 flood myths from all over the world, all telling the same core story. The world was destroyed by a great deluge, and only a handful of survivors were left to restart civilization. Are these just stories, or are they the traumatized memories of the survivors of a real geological cataclysm, the survivors of the civilization that made the maps? More recently, a new scientific theory has emerged that provides another equally terrifying explanation: the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the Earth was suddenly plunged back into freezing conditions for over 1,000 years. Geologists have found a thin black layer of sediment across North America and Europe from this exact period, a layer rich in nanodiamonds, melted glass, and other materials that are the telltale signature of a major cosmic impact event. The theory suggests that fragments of a large comet struck the Earth, hitting the North American ice sheet. The impact would have been apocalyptic. It would have triggered unimaginable earthquakes, flash-melted parts of the ice cap, causing catastrophic global flooding, and thrown so much dust and water into the atmosphere that it blotted out the sun, triggering a sudden, brutal return to Ice Age conditions. This event, the Younger Dryas impact, aligns perfectly with the timeline given by Plato for the destruction of Atlantis. It provides a scientific mechanism for the violent earthquakes and floods that sunk a continent in a single day and night of misfortune. It would explain the sudden freezing of Antarctica and Greenland. It would explain the great flood myths. It explains everything. We are looking at a coherent picture of our forgotten past. A global, advanced, seafaring civilization flourished during the late Ice Age in a world with a different climate. They mapped the entire planet. Then, around 12,800 years ago, a catastrophe, be it a crustal shift or a comet impact, destroyed their world.
We are looking at a coherent picture of our forgotten past. A global, advanced, seafaring civilization flourished during the late Ice Age in a world with a different climate. They mapped the entire planet. Then, around 12,800 years ago, a cataclysm, be it a crustal shift or a comet impact, destroyed their world. Their homeland sank or froze. Their civilization was shattered. The few survivors, scattered across the globe in their ships, became the culture bearers of myth. They landed on the shores of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Americas, carrying with them the fragmented knowledge of their lost world, astronomy, architecture, agriculture, and, most precious of all, a handful of maps. These maps were copied and copied again through the millennia, passed down through secret channels, perhaps in places like the Library of Alexandria, until they eventually fell into the hands of Renaissance cartographers like Piri Reis, Orontes Phineas, and Mercator. These men didn't understand what they had. They were just trying to create the most accurate maps they could, using all the ancient sources available to them. They didn't realize they were preserving the last will and testament of a drowned civilization. This is the story the maps are telling us, a story that is systematically denied by mainstream institutions. Why? Because it shatters their most cherished narratives. It destroys the idea of linear, progressive history. It demolishes the notion that we are the pinnacle of human achievement. And it reveals a terrifying truth about our planet and our place on it, that our civilization is not permanent, that it is fragile, and that we are living on a world that has experienced cycles of destruction and renewal that we have been conditioned to forget. They call the maps anomalies and the legends myths because the alternative is simply too frightening to face. We have now seen the maps that point to a lost world. We have explored the legends that remember it. We have considered the cataclysm that may have destroyed it. The evidence on paper and in myth is overwhelming, but it begs the final, crucial question. If this great civilization existed, where are its ruins? Where is the physical proof carved in stone? Is it all at the bottom of the ocean? Or could it be that some of it has survived? Could it be that some of the most mysterious and inexplicable ancient structures on Earth are not the work of the primitive ancestors we're told about, but are in fact the legacy of this one great forgotten civilization? In our final chapter, we will leave the world of maps and step into the world of stone. We will journey to the Giza Plateau in Egypt, to the impossible heights of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, to the colossal terraces of Baalbek in Lebanon,
We will examine impossible stonework, precision engineering, and celestial alignments that defy the capabilities of their supposed builders. The maps have shown us the way. They have told us that a great civilization once existed. Now we will go and look at what they built. The evidence, it turns out, has not been buried. It has been hiding in plain sight all along. The journey is not over. The deepest secrets are yet to be revealed. Subscribe now so you do not miss the final breathtaking chapter. We will uncover the truth that is locked in the megaliths, and you will see for yourself that we are not the first. We have stared into the abyss of forgotten time. We have held in our minds maps that chart a world drowned by water and buried by ice, a world that our history books tell us never existed. We have traced the legends of Atlantis and Hyperborea, not as myths, but as the fractured memories of a global civilization torn apart by a great cataclysm. The paper trail, the echoes in the ink, they all point to one terrifying conclusion. We are not the first. But paper can be burned. Maps can be dismissed as forgeries or fantasies. Legends can be labeled as allegory. This is the defense of the mainstream world, the shield they use to protect our fragile, comforting story of history. But there is another kind of evidence that cannot be so easily dismissed, evidence that is not written on paper, but is carved in stone. Stone that weighs hundreds, even thousands of tons. Stone that has been cut with a precision our own technology would struggle to match. What if the fingerprints of this lost civilization are not at the bottom of the ocean? What if they are towering over us, hiding in the most famous and visited places on Earth? What if we have been staring at the ruins of Atlantis our entire lives and have simply been told to call them by another name? In this final chapter, we leave the world of maps and step into the world of megaliths. The maps showed us where to look. Now we will see what they were pointing to. Our first stop is the most iconic and mysterious place on the planet, the Giza Plateau in Egypt. For thousands of years, the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx have stood as silent sentinels guarding the secrets of a distant past. The story we are told is simple, confident, and taught to every schoolchild. The Great Pyramid was a tomb built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BC. The Great Sphinx, a monolith with the body of a lion and the head of a man, was carved in the likeness of Pharaoh Khafre, Khufu's son, a generation later. We are told these monuments were built by tens of thousands of laborers working for decades with nothing more than copper chisels, stone hammers, and wet sand to move the massive blocks with hair's breadth precision, a triumph of primitive engineering and human will. It is a wonderful story, but it is a story that falls apart the moment you begin to ask questions, the moment you look past the textbook and see what is actually there. Let us begin with the Great Pyramid. It is composed of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, many weighing between 2 and 15 tons, and some in the King's Chamber weighing up to 80 tons. These massive granite blocks were quarried from Aswan, over 500 miles away. How did a Bronze Age culture, without the wheel, without iron tools, without modern cranes, quarry, transport, and lift these massive city bus-sized blocks over 200 feet into the air with hair's breadth precision? The ramp theories proposed by Egyptologists are, to be frank, laughable. The material required to build a ramp to the top of the pyramid would exceed the material of the pyramid itself by several times. It is an engineering absurdity. But the weight of the stones is not even the greatest mystery. It is the precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of within 3/60ths of a single degree. An accuracy that was not matched by any builder in the Western world until the 18th century AD. Its 8 sides are perfectly concave, a feature so subtle it can only be seen from the air at the equinoxes, and one that was not even discovered until the age of aviation. The fine, white casing stones that once covered the pyramid were cut and fitted with a tolerance of 1/50th of an inch, so perfectly joined that a modern razor blade cannot be slipped between them.
This is not the work of men with copper chisels and stone pounders. This is the work of a culture with a profound understanding of mathematics, engineering, and astronomy, a level of technological sophistication that is completely out of place in the Bronze Age. Could the dynastic Egyptians have built it? Or did they perhaps find it? Did they come across a monument of impossible antiquity, a relic from a much older, far more advanced civilization, and simply claim it as their own, building their own cruder tombs and temples in its shadow? The evidence for this is not just in the pyramid, but in the stone sentinel that sits before it, the Great Sphinx. The official story tells us it was carved by Khafre around 2550 BC, but the stone of the Sphinx tells a different tale. In the 1990s, a researcher named John Anthony West, together with Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, brought a devastating piece of evidence to the world's attention. They looked not at the head of the Sphinx, which has been recarved many times, but at its body, and at the walls of the enclosure from which it was carved. And they saw something that no Egyptologist could explain. The body of the Sphinx shows deep, vertical erosion patterns. This is not the horizontal, layered erosion caused by wind and sand, which is what you see on all the other monuments at Giza from Khafre's time. This is the unmistakable pattern of water erosion, of precipitation, of thousands of years of heavy rainfall running down the sides of the stone. There is only one problem. The Giza Plateau has been a hyper-arid desert, part of the Sahara, for the last 5,000 years. There has not been enough rainfall in that entire period to cause this kind of deep erosion. For the Sphinx to bear these marks, it must have stood there for thousands of years before the desert formed, during a period when the climate in Egypt was wet and rainy. According to geologists, that last rainy period, the African humid period, ended somewhere between 10,000 and 5,000 BC. This means the Sphinx was not carved in 2550 BC. It must be much, much older. It could be 7,000, 9,000, or even more than 12,000 years old. This one piece of geological evidence shatters the official timeline of Egypt. It proves that a massive, sophisticated monument existed on the Giza Plateau thousands of years before the pharaohs. It pushes the origin of civilization in Egypt deep into the past, into the very era of the lost civilization of the maps, the era before the Great Cataclysm. The dynastic Egyptians were not the builders of these great wonders. They were the inheritors. They were a legacy civilization, living in the shadow of a much greater past they no longer fully understood. And they built their own civilization on the ruins of another. This is the truth hidden in the stones of Giza, that we are looking at the relics of a forgotten age, the handiwork of the same people who charted the world before the ice came. They were here, and the Sphinx is their silent witness. The impossible fingerprints in stone are not confined to Egypt. If we follow the trail of the maps and the legends of the culture-bearer gods who appeared after a great flood, our journey takes us across the Atlantic to the desolate, wind-swept highlands of the Andes in South America, 13,000 feet above sea level. Here, on the shores of Lake Titicaca in modern Bolivia, lie the ruins of a city that defies all explanation. The city is called Tiahuanaco. To stand at Tiahuanaco is to stand in a world of impossibilities. The official archaeological story is that it was the center of an empire that flourished between 300 and 1000 AD. But the stonework here tells a different story.
It whispers of a technology and an antiquity that has no place in the official timeline. At a section of the site known as Pumapunku, the ground is littered with some of the most extraordinary and baffling stonework on the entire planet. Massive blocks of andesite and diorite, some of the hardest stones in the world, have been cut and shaped with the precision of modern machine tools. There are the famous H blocks, each weighing several tons, carved with perfect right angles, smooth as glass surfaces, and intricate interior cuts that seem to have been made by a router or a laser. There are blocks with rows of perfectly circular, evenly spaced holes that look for all the world like they were drilled. The people of this region, according to archaeologists, had no writing system and no knowledge of the wheel. Yet we are asked to believe that they created this incredible precision architecture using nothing more than stone hammers and sand. It is an insult to our intelligence. No mainstream explanation has ever come close to solving the puzzle of Pumapunku. It is the work of a culture that possessed a lost, high technology. Not far from Pumapunku stands another enigma, the Gateway of the Sun. It is a single, monolithic portal, carved from one solid 10-ton block of andesite. Its surface is covered with intricate carvings, including the famous figure in the center, a deity often identified as Viracocha. And who was Viracocha? According to the legends of the Andes, he was the great creator god, a pale, bearded figure who appeared after a world-destroying flood. He traveled through the land, teaching the survivors the arts of civilization before departing across the sea, promising to one day return. Does that story sound familiar? A civilizing god who appears after a great flood. It is the same story told across the world, from Mesoamerica to Sumeria. Is Viracocha a myth, or is he a memory? A memory of a survivor of a lost, advanced civilization, perhaps the very civilization that built Tiwanaku before the flood came. And how old is the site? The official dates are based on organic material found in the later, cruder layers of occupation. But what about the original megalithic foundation? An early 20th century researcher named Arthur Posnanski spent 50 years studying Tiwanaku. By analyzing the astronomical alignments of its temples, he argued that the city was originally built to align with the stars as they appeared around 15,000 BC. While his methods are considered controversial today, he was one of the first to recognize that the true age of the site might be thousands of years older than accepted history allows. A high-altitude city built by a super-civilization in the distant Ice Age. The mystery continues just a few hundred miles away, in Peru, at the site of Sacsayhuaman, overlooking the city of Cusco. Here we find a massive fortress with zigzagging walls built from some of the largest stones ever used in an ancient structure. The walls are made of enormous polygonal blocks of limestone, some weighing over 120 tons. They are fitted together without mortar, so perfectly that you can't slip a thin sheet of paper between them. The official story is that this was built by the Inca Empire around the 15th century AD. But if you look closely, you will see a strange contradiction. The lower courses of the walls, the truly gigantic megalithic blocks, are fitted with this impossible precision. But the upper sections, which are clearly later repairs and additions, are made of small, crudely fitted stones. This is obviously the work of the Inca. It looks for all the world as if the Inca arrived, found a much older, more sophisticated megalithic foundation, and then built their own, cruder structures on top of it. They were not the original builders. They were the inheritors, just like the Egyptians at Giza. Who then built the original walls of Sacsayhuaman? Who possessed the technology to quarry, transport, and fit 100-ton blocks with such perfect joinery? The Inca themselves, according to the Spanish chroniclers, admitted they did not know who built it. They said it was the work of giants. From Egypt to the Andes, the story is the same thing. impossible stonework, hints of a lost high technology, legends of gods who came after a flood, and an official historical narrative that refuses to connect the dots. The stones are crying out with a story of a forgotten past, but the gatekeepers of our history have plugged their ears. They do not want to hear. The journey into the land of impossible stone now takes us from the Americas to the Middle East in modern-day Lebanon. Here lies the ancient city of Baalbek. For centuries, it has been famous for the magnificent Roman temples that stand there, dedicated to Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus. They are some of the largest and best-preserved Roman ruins in the world. But the Romans, for all their engineering genius, are not the real mystery of Baalbek. The real mystery lies beneath their feet. The Roman temples are built on top of a massive, ancient stone platform. A platform so colossal, so baffling, that it makes the Great Pyramid seem like a child's plaything. The western wall of this platform contains a section known as the Trilithon. It is composed of 3 of the largest worked stones on the face of the earth, 3 monolithic blocks of limestone, each measuring around 60 feet long and 14 feet high. Each one is estimated to weigh between 800 and 1,000 tons. Let that sink in. 1,000 tons. For comparison, the largest blocks in the Great Pyramid are 80 tons. The largest modern mobile cranes in the world today would struggle to lift a weight of 1,000 tons. Yet we are supposed to believe that the Romans, or some even earlier people with primitive technology, quarried these stones, transported them from a nearby quarry, and lifted them over 20 feet into the air to place them in a perfectly level wall? It is beyond belief. It is an engineering feat that remains unexplained to this day. But it gets even more unbelievable. A short distance away, in the original quarry, lies another stone block, even larger, that was never moved. It is known as the Hajar al-Hibla, the stone of the pregnant woman, or the stone of the south. It is still attached to the bedrock at its base. This single block is estimated to weigh a staggering 1,200 tons. In recent years, an even larger block, estimated at over 1,600 tons, has been discovered nearby. This proves that the builders of the platform at Baalbek not only had the ability to move 1,000-ton stones, but they intended to work with stones that were even larger. What kind of technology did they possess? How did they quarry, lift, and transport these weights? There are no records. There are no tools left behind. There is only the silent, overwhelming evidence of the stones themselves. The Romans, who built their temples on top of this platform, were mystified by it. They did not claim to have built it. Local legends, stretching back into the mists of time, say that the platform was built by giants or by the gods under the command of Cain from the Bible. They say it was the very first city built on earth after the Great Flood. Again, the same themes emerge: a great flood, gods, giants, and impossible megalithic architecture that seems to be the work of a lost superhuman technology. Baalbek, like Giza, like Tiwanaku, is not just a ruin, it is a message. It is a monument left behind by a civilization whose power and knowledge we can barely begin to fathom. Who were they? We can now give them a name. They are the people of the maps. The same global, seafaring culture that charted Antarctica without ice and Greenland without its ice cap also had the technology to build with stones weighing thousands of tons. They were a single, interconnected, worldwide civilization, the civilization that our myths remember as Atlantis. The evidence is overwhelming. The maps, the legends, and now the stones themselves all converge on a single revolutionary truth. Our history is a lie. The story of our past has been sanitized, its most important chapter ripped out and hidden away. We are not the first great technological civilization on this planet. We are simply the most recent. The ruins at Giza, Tiahuanaco, and Baalbek are not the work of Bronze Age Egyptians, pre-Incan tribes, or Romans. They are the legacy of a much older world. They are the survivors of a cataclysm that wiped the slate of history clean. And the reason mainstream science and history refuse to acknowledge this is simple and terrifying. To do so would be to admit that everything they have built their careers and their worldview on is wrong. It would be to admit that we are a fragile species living on a volatile planet and that a civilization as great or greater than our own was utterly erased from existence. That truth is too big, too destabilizing, too frightening. It is easier to invent stories of slaves pulling ropes and men with copper chisels than to face the monumental reality of the stones. But the stones do not lie. They have been waiting patiently for thousands of years for a generation to come along that is brave enough to see them for what they are. Not tombs for pharaohs or temples for Roman gods, but the last defiant fingerprints of a lost and brilliant world. They are a warning that what has happened before can and likely will happen again. We are a civilization with amnesia. And the proof of our forgotten past is all around us, if only we dare to open our eyes. We have stood before the impossible stones of Giza, Tiahuanaco, and Baalbek. We have touched with our minds the colossal blocks and the precision cuts that defy the history we have been taught. These are not the works of men with primitive tools in limitless time. They are the scars of a forgotten technology, the enduring fingerprints of a civilization that possessed a power and knowledge that has been erased from our memory. The maps we examined in the first chapters told us where to look. They pointed us to a world that existed before a great cataclysm. Now the stones have confirmed that story. They scream a silent testament to the genius of their builders. But if a house burns down, it is not just the walls that are lost. It is everything inside, the books, the art, the knowledge, the spirit of the family that lived there. If a great global civilization was wiped from the face of the earth, what happened to their science, their understanding of the cosmos, their mathematics, their history? Did it all vanish beneath the waves and the ice? Or did fragments of it survive, passed down through the ages by the scattered survivors? What happens when a primitive culture encounters a technologically advanced one? We have seen this in our own history. We call it a cargo cult. During World War II, when American military planes landed on remote islands in the Pacific, the native islanders, who had never seen such things, could not comprehend the technology. They saw the giant noisy birds that came from the sky as divine. They saw the uniformed men with their radios and rifles as gods. The cargo they brought, canned food, medicine, tools, was seen as magical gifts from another world. After the war, when the planes stopped coming, the islanders built mock runways out of straw, carved wooden replicas of airplanes, and performed rituals, hoping to summon the cargo gods back. Their experience of advanced technology had been transformed into a religion. Now imagine this on a global scale. Imagine a worldwide, highly advanced civilization, and imagine it is destroyed in a sudden, violent cataclysm. A handful of survivors, perhaps in great ships, are scattered across the planet. They land on shores inhabited by more primitive, hunter-gatherer peoples who survived the disaster. To these people, their survivors would be gods. Their knowledge of astronomy would seem like the magic of the heavens. Their engineering skills would be seen as the power to command the earth. Their memory of their lost homeland would become the legend of a sunken paradise. Their history would become myth. Their science would become sacred, esoteric knowledge, preserved in religious rituals and architectural codes that were copied for generations long after the original meaning was lost.
This is the great secret of the ancient world. The civilizations we know, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Maya, were not the inventors of science and civilization. They were the inheritors. They were the cargo cults, living in the shadow of a much greater, fallen world. And the proof of this lost science is not hidden. It is encoded in their most sacred structures and their most ancient myths.
waiting for us to decipher it. Let us return to the Giza Plateau. We have already seen the geological evidence that the Sphinx is far older than the pharaohs, a silent witness to a time when the Sahara was a green and rainy savanna. We have seen the engineering impossibilities of the Great Pyramid, but now we must look up from the stones to the stars, for it is in the sky that Giza's builders encoded the truest and most undeniable secret of their origins. For decades, the mainstream view held that any astronomical alignments at Giza were either coincidental or related to simple solar worship. But in the 1980s, a Belgian engineer named Robert Bauval made a discovery that would shatter this simplistic view forever. He noticed something strange about the layout of the three great pyramids of Giza, the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. They were not in a perfect line. The smallest of the three, the pyramid of Menkaure, was slightly offset to the east. This offset had always puzzled observers, but Bauval, an amateur astronomer, recognized the pattern immediately. It was a perfect terrestrial map of the three stars in Orion's belt. The two larger pyramids, Khufu and Khafre, matched the two brighter stars in the belt, Alnatok and Alnilam. And the smaller, offset pyramid of Menkaure perfectly matched the position of the smaller, offset third star, Mintaka. Even the relative brightness of the stars was mimicked in the relative size of the pyramids. This correlation was already astounding, but Bauval took it a step further. He knew that due to a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes, a slow 26,000-year wobble in the Earth's axis, the position of the stars in the sky changes over long periods of time. He input the Giza layout into a computer program that could track the stars back in time. He wanted to find the date when the pyramids on the ground would be a perfect mirror image of the stars in the sky. When did the pattern on the ground perfectly match the pattern above? Not in 2500 BC, the supposed age of the pyramids. On that date, the alignment was close but not perfect. Bauval wound the celestial clock further and further back, and then he found it. The one date in history with a perfect match. The one moment when the map on the ground was a flawless reflection of the heavens. That date was 10,500 BC. 10,500 years before Christ. This date is an astronomical bullseye. It is the exact era that the geology of the Sphinx points to. It is the era at the end of the last ice age. It is the era immediately following the Younger Dryas cataclysm, and it is the era Plato gave for the civilization of Atlantis. The pyramids at Giza are a clock, and their hands are pointing to a specific moment in time, a time of endings and beginnings, a time the builders wanted us to remember forever. This is not a tomb for a pharaoh. It is a memorial, a message encoded in stone and stars, telling us when their world, the world of the lost civilization, came to an end. But the message is not only at Giza. Let us travel to another site, one that is perhaps the most revolutionary and paradigm-shattering archaeological discovery of our lifetimes. In southeastern Turkey, a place called Göbekli Tepe. For decades, it was thought to be nothing more than a medieval burial ground. But in the 1990s, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began to excavate. And what he found has forced us to tear up every textbook on human history. He uncovered a massive temple complex, a series of circular enclosures made of enormous T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing over 18 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons. These pillars are covered in breathtakingly intricate carvings of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, and abstract human figures. It is a work of sophisticated art and megalithic engineering. Here is the impossibility. Scientific carbon-14 dating of the site has proven beyond any doubt that Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BC. That is nearly 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, 6,000 years before Stonehenge. According to our official history, the people of this era were primitive hunter-gatherers. They had not yet invented pottery, not yet domesticated animals, not yet discovered agriculture. They were supposed to be living in simple huts, not quarrying and erecting 20-ton megaliths into a complex, astronomically aligned temple. Göbekli Tepe is a smoking gun. It is definitive proof that a highly organized, technologically capable, and spiritually sophisticated culture existed in deep antiquity, at the very time the Ice Age was ending. It is the work of the survivors. But it is more than just a temple. Many researchers now believe it was a sophisticated astronomical observatory, the celestial clock of the ancient world. They have analyzed the carvings on the pillars, particularly the famous Pillar 43, known as the Vulture Stone. Researchers from the University of Edinburgh argue that the animals carved on this stone are not random. They are astronomical symbols. They represent the constellations of the zodiac, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Libra. And they believe the pillar is a star map, a snapshot of the sky on a specific and very important date.
Using computer simulations, they have shown that the arrangement of the constellations on the stone precisely matches the sky as it would have appeared around 10,950 BC. And what does the stone depict? It shows a headless man, a symbol of death and destruction, and it shows a sky filled with falling objects. The researchers argue that this is not just a date stamp, it is a historical record. It is a memorial carved by the survivors of the Younger Dryas impact event, the day the comets fell from the sky and destroyed their world. Göbekli Tepe is a monument to the cataclysm. It was built by the survivors of Atlantis, a place to preserve their sacred knowledge of the stars and to mark the moment that their golden age was lost forever. The echoes of this lost astronomical knowledge are everywhere in the ancient world, if you know how to look. In Dendera, Egypt, in a temple from the late Ptolemaic period, there is a famous circular zodiac carved into the ceiling. It shows the familiar constellations, but in a strange arrangement. For years, scholars like R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz have argued that the Dendera zodiac is not a map of the contemporary sky, but a complex astronomical computer, a map of the great cycle of precession. They believe it encodes a timeline of world ages, or yugas, and that it points to a beginning point of the zodiacal cycle, a Zep Kepi, or first time, thousands of years in the remote past. The Greco-Roman Egyptians did not invent this knowledge. They were preserving a sacred science they had inherited from a much older source. From Giza to Göbekli Tepe to Dendera, the message is consistent. The ancient world was obsessed with astronomy, with the cycles of the stars, and specifically with a date, around 10,500 BC. They built their most sacred structures to function as astronomical clocks, all pointing back to this one pivotal moment. This was not primitive sun worship. This was the sophisticated science of a lost civilization, a science of time itself, a science that was trying to tell us something. It was trying to tell us when it all began and when it all ended. The science of the lost civilization was not limited to the stars. It was also the science of the earth, a science of number, harmony, and proportion, a science we are now rediscovering and calling sacred geometry. They understood that the universe was not a random chaos, but a beautifully ordered symphony of mathematical principles, and they encoded this knowledge into the very dimensions of their greatest structures. Let us return once more to the Great Pyramid of Giza. We have been told it is a tomb, a brute monument of stone, but it is a computer, built with a mathematical precision that is nothing short of miraculous. Its builders knew the precise dimensions of our planet, a feat we did not replicate until the modern age. If you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth.
If you take the perimeter of its base and multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. This is not a coincidence. The pyramid is a scale model of the northern hemisphere of our planet, built on a scale of 1 to 43,200. But how did its builders know the size of our planet, and why the number 43,200? It is not a random number. It is a number deeply connected to the precession of the equinoxes, the great 26,000-year cycle of the heavens. The Earth wobbles on its axis at a rate of 1 degree every 72 years. 72 multiplied by 600 equals 43,200. The number is an astronomical key. The pyramid is a fusion of astronomy and geodesy, a message that says we knew the size of our planet and we knew the great cycles of the stars. The mathematical secrets do not end there. The pyramid's design incorporates with stunning accuracy two of the most important numbers in all of mathematics, pi and the golden ratio. These are not just abstract numbers, they are the fundamental constants of creation, the ratios that govern the growth of shells, the branching of trees, the spiral of galaxies, and the proportions of the human body. The Great Pyramid is a symphony in stone, a textbook of universal mathematics. This was not a tomb, it was a library, a time capsule, a device built to preserve and transmit the most profound scientific knowledge of a lost civilization across the abyss of a great cataclysm, to be rediscovered by a future humanity that was ready to understand. And this sacred science was not limited to Egypt. It was also a science of the earth, a science of number, harmony, and proportion. And all across the world we find the same fingerprints. In the 1960s, a professor of engineering from Oxford named Alexander Thom spent decades surveying hundreds of megalithic sites across Britain and Europe, places like Stonehenge and Karnak. He discovered, to his astonishment, that these sites were not just random collections of stones. They were incredibly sophisticated astronomical observatories designed to track the sun, the moon, and the stars with a precision that would not be equaled for thousands of years. More than that, he proved that they were all built using a standardized unit of measurement. He called it the megalithic yard, equal to about 2.72 feet. The same unit of measurement used across a continent, from Scotland to France, thousands of years ago. This implies a unified, interconnected, and scientifically advanced culture. The same culture that built Göbekli Tepe, the same culture that built the first Giza, the people of the lost civilization. They understood that mathematics was the language of the universe. They used sacred geometry not just as a tool for building, but as a way of life, a way of harmonizing their structures and their societies with the fundamental order of the cosmos. Their world was built on a principle of harmony, a harmony between the earth and the heavens, a harmony that was shattered by the great cataclysm. When we look at the ruins of these ancient sites today, we are not just seeing stones, we are seeing a lost science, a science that was holistic, that saw no separation between the physical and the spiritual, between mathematics and consciousness, a science that we are only just beginning to rediscover. The knowledge was never truly lost, it was simply encoded, hidden in plain sight, in the proportions of the pyramids and the alignment of the stone circles, waiting for a time when we would be wise enough to read the message that we live in an intelligent, harmonious universe, and that we are the inheritors of a science far more profound than our own. If a civilization so vast and brilliant was wiped from the earth, and if its scientific knowledge was encoded in stone and stars, what happened to its story? What happened to the memory of its people, its triumphs, and its fall? It became the one thing that can survive even the greatest of cataclysms. It became a story, a myth. the oldest and most persistent story in the world. All across our planet, from the jungles of the Amazon to the deserts of Australia, from the mountains of Tibet to the plains of North America, we find the same recurring myth: the Great Flood. Over 200 cultures, many of whom had no contact with each other, all tell the same fundamental story. In a distant past, the world was a paradise, a golden age. But humanity became corrupt, and the gods, or God, decided to cleanse the earth with a world-destroying deluge. A warning was given to a single righteous man. He was told to build a great boat, an ark, and to take aboard his family and the seeds of all living things. The rains came, the waters rose, and the world was drowned. After the flood subsided, the ark came to rest on a high mountain, and from this small group of survivors, humanity was reborn. We know this story as the tale of Noah from the Bible, but it is far older than that. In ancient Mesopotamia, it is the story of Utnapishtim from the Epic of Gilgamesh. In ancient Sumeria, it is the story of Ziusudra. In ancient Greece, it is the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. In ancient India, it is the story of Manu. The names change, the details shift, but the core narrative is always the same. Mainstream scholars tell us this is just a coincidence, a common archetype that arises from a primitive fear of water. But this is not a local flood story. This is a global story, a story of the entire world being submerged. Could this be a shared, collective memory of the traumatized eyewitness account of the survivors of the Younger Dryas cataclysm, when the melting ice sheets and the impacts from space did in fact cause catastrophic global flooding? The myth of the Great Flood is not a myth. It is history disguised as legend. And what of the figures who came after the flood? The myths are equally consistent. From the waters or from the sky came the culture-bearer gods. In Mesopotamia, it was the Apkallu, or Ons, a being described as half man, half fish, who emerged from the sea to teach the survivors the arts of writing, mathematics, and law. In Egypt, it was Osiris, who brought agriculture and civilization. In the Andes, it was Viracocha, the pale, bearded god who taught the people how to build cities and track the stars. In Mesoamerica, it was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, another pale, bearded figure who brought learning and the calendar. Who were these gods? Why are they so often described as looking different from the local people, often with fair skin and beards? Why do they all bring the same package of advanced knowledge? Are they gods, or are they the survivors of the lost civilization? The highly advanced seafarers from Atlantis, whose great ships survived the deluge, and who traveled the world trying to restart civilization, trying to pass on the fragments of their lost knowledge. To the primitive, traumatized people they encountered, they would have seemed like gods. Their advanced technology would have been seen as magic. Their history of a drowned world would have been preserved as a sacred story. This is the key that unlocks all of ancient mythology. The gods were not gods. They were us. They were an earlier, more advanced version of humanity, a humanity that we have forgotten. The stories of their battles in the heavens, their celestial chariots, their powerful weapons, these are not fantasies. These are the garbled memories of a lost high technology. The evidence for this forgotten branch of the human family may even be in our own blood. Modern genetics is beginning to reveal strange anomalies, ancient and isolated DNA haplogroups that do not fit the standard out-of-Africa model of human migration. People like the Basques of Spain, whose language and genetic makeup are unique in all of Europe, or certain Native American tribes whose DNA shows ancient connections to both Europe and Asia. Could these be the faint genetic traces of the survivors, the descendants of the Atlantean diaspora? The maps showed us the lost world. The stones showed us their impossible technology. The stars showed us the date of their fall, and the myths tell us their story. It is all one, single, coherent narrative that has been staring us in the face for centuries. A story of a great global civilization destroyed in a cataclysm around 12,000 years ago, whose survivors kick-started the civilizations we know to history. This is our true past, a past that is far grander, far older, and far more tragic than we have ever been told. It is the story of a great forgetting, a planetary amnesia. Later civilizations built upon the ruins, both physical and intellectual, of this lost world. They claimed the science as their own, they turned the history into religion, and they buried the memory of their predecessors under layers of myth. Powerful institutions, from ancient priesthoods to modern academia, have a vested interest in keeping this truth hidden, because it shatters their authority and the simplistic, comforting narratives they have sold to us. But the truth cannot be hidden forever. The past is speaking. It is speaking through the impossible precision of the pyramids, through the water-worn stone of the Sphinx, through the astronomical alignments of Göbekli Tepe, and through the persistent global memory of a great flood. This is not just a story about the past. It is a warning about our future. The civilization that came before us was brilliant. They were global, they were powerful, and they were erased. Their story reminds us that our own civilization, with all its technology and all its pride, is desperately fragile. We live on a planet that is subject to violent cyclical change, and we have built our world on a foundation of blissful ignorance about the true nature of our history and our place in the cosmos. We have now followed the evidence from the maps to the myths to the megaliths. We have seen the fingerprints of a lost world everywhere we have looked. But one final question remains. If this knowledge has been so actively suppressed, who is doing the suppressing? And what is the ultimate goal? What is so dangerous about this truth that the gatekeepers of our reality have worked so long to keep it hidden? The answer to that will take us into the heart of power itself, into the modern age where the war over history is still being fought in the shadows. But that is a story for another time.